And greetings, happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on BlazeTV, radio, and podcast. I am Steve Deace. He is Todd Erzin. He is Aaron McIntyre. Coming up on the show here today, we are going to have a very special, I just realized I forgot to tell you guys this. We were going to have a very special hour-long Theology Thursday next hour because Monday it's the past tense. It happened 3 days ago. Monday was the 20th anniversary of my conversion. And I get a ton of questions all the time about that testimony, what occurred, what changed, and figured with this week marking the 20th anniversary of that momentous change, this would be a good time to maybe reset some of that. But then I also want to talk about two of the biggest lessons that I have learned in my 20 years as a Christian. And hopefully those lessons will encourage and inspire those of you that are tuned in to listen next hour as well. At the bottom of this hour, as we continue to be told the only possible suffering in the world that matters is what goes on in Ukraine. Former Senator Sam Brownback is going to join us, and he's going to say, yeah, there's some other suffering in the world that is being overlooked. And I guess because, they're not tied into Davos and George Soros, their lives just don't matter as much, I guess.
I think that's the math, Steve.
Yeah, that's how the math works. If you're tied into Davos or Soros, and I repeat myself, then your suffering matters. If you're not, then your suffering does not. So we'll talk about that here at the bottom of the hour. Before we get to all of that, though, per tradition on the show, whenever a partner makes their debut on the program, we love to give them top billing, and that is with Beam. Did you know that poor sleep can cause weight gain, mood issues, poor mental health, lower productivity, and that sleeping less than 6 to 7 hours per night is linked to even reduced white blood cell count? That gets into immunity stuff because those are what protect our body from illnesses and viruses, bacteria, and more. Sleep really is the foundation of our mental and physical health and performance during the day. So having a consistent nighttime routine is non-negotiable. And today, you get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder. It's their best-selling healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Now available in delicious flavors like cinnamon cocoa, chocolate peanut butter, even mint chip. Better sleep has never tasted better. Dream is tested for high-quality efficacy and formulated to ease your body into rest and support all 4 stages of the sleep cycle with no next-day grogginess that you'll get from taking drugs, because this is an all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, apigenin, melatonin, to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Just mix Beam Dream into hot water or milk, stir or froth, and enjoy right before bedtime. Find out why so many major publications are talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes and business professionals. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Steve and then use the code Steve at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Steve. Use the code at checkout, code Steve, at shopbeam.com/Steve. And with that, let's get to it. Here is Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by Why Doesn't Your Favorite Republican Sound Like This? Ron DeSantis went on ABC News and was asked about his state's guidance on the latest COVID jabs.
They have not demonstrated the benefit of the boosters. I think they did studies on mice for Pfizer. Moderna did do 50 humans. But you had one medically significant event that required physician attendant out of the 50. And so the question is these things have not been studied long enough. And there's not a need.
Well, the CDC disagrees with that.
How good has CDC done, with all due respect, over the last few years? How many people trust CDC at this point? And I was somebody 5 years ago, if you would have said CDC said this, that would have carried a lot of weight for me. I was in the trenches during COVID. They were citing flimsy studies saying that masks will stop COVID. They were citing flimsy studies about the mRNA shots originally. Remember, they said, the CDC director said, if you take these shots, you will not get COVID. That is not true. We know it's not true. People got COVID. They would make representations which were not true. So the trust that's been lost, I think, has been incalculable. And one of the things that I said is, when I come in, we're going to have a reckoning about all these COVID policies. We're going to hold people accountable who got it wrong.
On the other hand, Donald Trump was in Iowa yesterday speaking to a crowd about his COVID record.
And then we had the dust blow in from China. And we had another problem that we had to work, and we did a great job with it. Didn't get the credit we deserved, but we did a great job.
He also claimed that Megyn Kelly was really mean to him in their interview.
I sat down for an hour, and then I did a Megyn Kelly one, and she had, she became nastier all of a sudden. She was pretty nasty, didn't you think? Anybody that watched it?
Can a man become a woman?
In my opinion.
Back to DeSantis, who was again asked to respond to Trump's comments that heartbeat bills are, quote, terrible.
Well, when you provide pro-life protections that says when a baby has a heartbeat, that there's protections, that is not something that pro-lifers think is terrible. They think that that is a noble and just thing to do. Of course, there have been many other states that have also done that. He claimed to be pro-life. He spoke at the March for Life and was waxing eloquently about how everybody counts. For him to then attack people like Iowa, South Carolina, Florida, all these other states, I thought was a big mistake. But look, I mean, I think he's taking positions that I think are different from what he took in 2015 when he first came onto the scene. And I do think he's a different candidate today than he was back then. And I think the one back then was probably closer to where Republican voters want to be than the latest iteration.
Moving on, in the past 24 hours alone, according to Customs and Border Patrol, over 10,000 illegals were encountered at the border, bringing totals back to all-time record high levels seen back in May before the end of Title 42. This comes on the same week the Department of Homeland Security announced it's extending its redesignating temporary protected status for 18 months to Venezuelans residing in the U.S. on or before July 31st of 2023. The agency estimates this will immediately make nearly 500,000 Venezuelans in the U.S. eligible to apply for work authorization. This also shields them from removal and deportation. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, your thoughts?
When you come to New York, we're not going to have more hotel rooms. We don't have capacity. So we have to also message properly that we're at our limit. If you're going to leave your country, go somewhere else.
Merrick Garland testified in front of the House yesterday on topics ranging from Hunter Biden to Ray Epps. Here's what he had to say in his opening remarks.
And our job is to uphold the rule of law. That means we apply the same laws to everyone. There is not one set of laws for the powerful and another for the powerless, one for the rich and another for the poor, one for Democrats and another for Republicans, or different rules depending upon one's race, or ethnicity, or religion.
You serious?
And finally, this from the Babylon Bee. Attorney General Garland's impartiality questioned due to conspicuous "Kill Trump" tattoo on forehead. And that's what happened while we were away.
Aaron's Montage brought to you by our friends over at Preborn. It's been my prayer that a day will come we won't have to talk about ministries like Preborn anymore. And we got closer last June with the overturning of Roe. We got closer 2 Junes ago now to that than we ever have been before. But we are still nowhere near that day, unfortunately. And that means organizations and outstanding ministries like Preborn are still going to need our support. They do the full gamut of pro-life ministry, not activism. It's more than that. It's ministry. They confront moms in crisis with the truth that what they're carrying is not their own body. It's another body with its own heartbeat. And about 80% of the time when a mom hears that through the ultrasound, she doesn't go through with killing her kid. Did you know that ultrasound only costs $28? Would you spend $28 for an 80% chance to save a life? I know a lot of you in this audience would. You can do that when you go to preborn.com/Steve. But they don't just stop there. They provide the pre and postnatal care for those moms as well, because now they need grace because they have turned from the lie. But now they need help to stay on that path and to walk in the truth. And all of that is free of charge as well. These are tax-deductible donations for an outstanding, life-changing, life-transforming ministry. Make that donation today at preborn.com/Steve. Dial pound 250. Say the keyword baby on your mobile phone if you'd like to do that, or go to preborn.com/Steve. All right. I want to get to what Aaron put in his montage. And we are, and I said this a couple days ago, we are finally having the primary in this race I was kind of hoping we were going to have the entire time. And unfortunately, the spirit of the age had to step in with just some good old-fashioned persecution and lawfare, and kind of interrupted this process for the last 3.5 months. But we are now talking issues. We are now talking governing visions of the country. And yesterday, and now with like no backdrops of legalities and court appearances, yesterday may have been the starkest difference yet I have seen between this iteration of Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Donald Trump here in Iowa still remains completely unrepentant that he wrote corporations a blank check to poison us. Just completely unrepentant. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis punched the most popular corporation in America in the throat, and yesterday it surrendered. They were backing out, going to reinvest. We're not moving. We're reinvesting, doubling the investment in our parks, going back to basics, and we kind of want to Homer Simpson the culture war thing here. We're going to just kind of back up and back off, is what Bob Iger said yesterday. And that choice is very clear. I mean, to me, that's a very simple choice to me. I mean, if you look at, that's the fulfillment of all our talking points here of the last few years. Big government and big corporations, neither one can be trusted. They're basically on the same side. It's the elites and the corporations, but we repeat ourselves, versus the average everyday working American. I mean, that's essentially every narrative that's existed on the American right since 2016, since Trump's campaign, became the phenomenon that it went on to become, right?
Yes.
Yesterday, to me, is a perfect symbol of this. Trump remains unrepentant that he gave big corporations that you can't sue, that have no liability, and then he grew their liability. It's true that Reagan made a horrible mistake by giving them liability at first in 1986, but with the PrEP Act, Trump gave them even more. Like double indemnity, basically. And then handed him a blank check for a poison. And he's not repentant about it. Instead thinks he isn't getting the credit that he deserves. The other guy punched the most venerable, popular corporation, maybe in American history. Certainly Disney would be on a list of most popular corporations in American history. Punched them right in the throat. And Disney yielded. And so all I really ever care about is what is the truth. When we went down the road of exposing what was going on with COVID early on and the lies you were being told, we had no idea how that was going to turn out. It ended up being the most profitable content I've ever produced. Prior to COVID, I lived paycheck to paycheck for a decade, guys. Paycheck to paycheck. The success that exposing COVID gave to this show, we did not anticipate at the time. In fact, you guys remember some of the conversations we were actually having early on during that period of time. We thought it might very well finish off the show.
Yep.
Because we anticipated that as Trump dug in more and more on the COVID narrative, and it became more and more obvious that he was wrong, that I was going to put a largely pro-Trump audience in a very difficult position of whether they were going to choose the truth or choose their idol, their star, And we all had conversations about that in the early spring of 2020. This might be it, And it's been, and so if it's true, do we go forward with it anyway? If indeed we end up having a complete revolt from the audience, and we all made the calculation, what? Yeah. If it's true, we're going to tell the truth. We had no idea. We had no idea it was going to spawn a #1 best-selling book. We had no forecast whatsoever that Fauci and Bargain was going to sell over 100,000 copies and be one of the top 5 best-selling political books of the year 2021. We had no idea. None. In fact, the idea that the Blaze would offer me a contract extension with a substantial raise on a corporate, well, now I mean corporate, small c, like, you know, a mass level of thought. No one was making 3-year plans in the spring of 2020 because we had no idea what life was going to be like in 3 years, given what we were going through at that point in time. We had no idea. We had no idea that this would end up being the most financially rewarding cause and content we've ever undertaken on the show. But we did it anyway because it was true. And that's what we think we're called to do ultimately, and the moment called for that. So I have no idea along those same lines. When I look at this primary without seeing a poll, I see completely different things than when I look at a poll. And when I look at a poll, I see something completely different from what I'm seeing when I look at this primary. And, you know, I'll always be honest with you, as honest as I can, that doesn't violate a third-party conscience, or confidence, I should say. I don't know which of those things is true. I don't. I don't. I think it's entirely possible that the polls are true, despite what I'm seeing on the ground. Let me explain why. Which candidate, the guy who's 3 times divorced, multiple bankruptcies, is unsure if a man can become a woman, wants to allow over 90% of abortions to remain legal, and is willing to offer people up to be a test subject to Big Pharma? Then the other guy who married his sweetheart at a young age and has just stayed with her, has small kids, you don't have to worry what is Ron DeSantis doing at 1 o'clock in the morning. No one knows, okay? No one has a clue because he's not doing anything. Actually stands up consistently for what we believe, or what we claim to believe in, without any drama or any unnecessary aggravation whatsoever. Which one of those 2 individuals is more emblematic of the era in which we live?
The former.
The former is very close. It's not even close. Let's make it more personal. Which worldview is more emblematic of the era in which we live?
Former.
Donald Trump's, or the one we communicate on this show?
Trump's.
It's not even close. It's really not even close. It's really not. And I think that it's entirely possible, therefore, that the polls are telling you the truth. Ron DeSantis is a man out of time. That's entirely, I can't reject that. I mean, it's entirely possible. And then I go and see what I see on the ground, and I just don't see the same thing on the ground at all. But okay, we'll find out here in a little more than 100 days. But here's why it was useful for him to run, even if the polls turn out to be true when we vote in Iowa. Now we know. See, I'm actually encouraged. The first time I've been encouraged in months is right now. And if the polls are true, I'm not going to get, as a DeSantis supporter, I'm not going to get the answer I want. In fact, I'm going to get the answer I'm going to hate the most. But I'm totally okay with it, because at least it's a concrete, definitive answer. And that's all I care about, is the truth. Just like I had no idea that pushing back on the most wicked, evil, dominant, most powerful narrative of our lifetimes, COVID, would end up being the most financially successful work I've ever done. I had no clue. No clue at all that was going to be the case. And we really had no idea at all until we wrote Fauci and Bargain well into the following year. Much of that whole year of 2020, we had no idea. None. I mean, go back and it's September of 2020, and I'm going to tell you guys, we're going to get a massive contract boost from the Blaze, and they're going to come here and build a state-of-the-art studio. And Todd, you and I are going to combine on a number one, not just a number one best-selling book. It was the number one book in the United States of America, right? All right. Let's go back and tell ourselves that on September 21st, 2020. Would anybody sitting here have believed it, gentlemen?
No.
No, not the windfall, no.
No. But that's how it turned out. But it didn't look like that at the time. Kind of looked like, well, the polls we're looking at now kind of looked like that, didn't it? Yeah. All I know how to do is just tell you the truth as best as I understand it and the best way I know how. That's all I know how to do. And I see this, I see this even within my own private circle of people I talk to around the country. When they hear Ron DeSantis talk, everybody texts me and contacts me. Oh, that was really good. Really think things are going well. The minute the polls come out, they text me. They got to do 57 things differently. This thing's failing. It's a failure. It's already over. It's the same psychosis that that is happening more broadly just outside of my own psychosis. So I don't know the answer. Here's what I do know. If the polls are right, it will have nothing to do with Donald Trump's attacks on Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis' favorables remain very high. It will have nothing to do with the clumsy start to the campaign. It will have nothing to do with the advance team didn't have the audio levels right at their energy announcement yesterday. Okay, the Trump team tweeted about that 75 times. Because I got to tell you, the amount of people that have ever come up to me and said, Steve, I'm going to vote based on how the advance team had the audio levels. It's just never happened. That's just all inside baseball, jerk-off stuff no one cares about. It's not going to be because they didn't return this phone call to that guy or they didn't fluff this person enough. Because we're now the issues are now being made bare. I mean, Donald Trump is running as a pro-choice candidate out in the open. I'm not happy to say that, but it is what it is. Now, the good thing with Trump tomorrow, he might look at a poll, might see that might be going against him, and he might go pro-life with no exceptions on us because that's what happens when you're purely transactional. But I am okay. This is my worldview. My worldview is actually not comfortable being the cultural accepted practice in this world. It's far more comfortable being the counterculture. I mean, my worldview represents a lot of people who were soundly rejected because they represented truth that people didn't want to hear. And so I'm okay with it. I am totally okay if it turns out that now, because now we're talking about issues. I would not have been okay with it a couple months ago. I might have said some of the same things and some of the same complaints about the campaign, but we're talking about issues now. And Ron DeSantis isn't just, writing this on a Substack. We're doing this stuff in major national platforms of consequence. No one can say they don't know. No one can. So in the end, if this generation wants someone who doesn't know if a man can become a woman or what a human life is, then I'm okay with it. I truly am. I'll just move on. But now we know. All my job is to deliver a message. If the culture that doesn't want to hear it rejects it, that's not my problem. I'm sleeping well at night, beam or no beam. I'm sleeping good. I toss and turn when we can't get the truth out. That's when I toss and turn. I don't ever toss and turn about when the truth comes out and the outcome doesn't go the way that I want. Because I think it's entirely possible this is a cursed generation. If you look at every ideology was unleashed by this current generation. They let every camel's nose under the tent. They let every wolf into the sheep's pen. Every single one of them. And they thought they were going to go from Woodstock to revival without Jesus. And they're going to learn. And unfortunately, we're going to learn a very bitter lesson alongside of them too. But they're going to learn that ain't going to happen. That won't work. It won't. It'll be a very painful lesson. But that's one of the things I'll talk about next hour. The greatest experience I have had in my walk with Christ, other than my own conversion, happened at really my lowest moment. The moment I was suffering the most as an individual. So I really don't know what's true. I don't. But I do know that The majority of the people don't want the truth. I know that. And the majority of the people, by the way, have never wanted the truth. They never have. They've always wanted a sell. And the greatest challenge of this era is going to be, in every context, whether it's COVID, whether it's this election, whether it's the last election, whether it's anything, whether it's your local school board, the greatest challenge is going to be finishing the race and standing for truth. The market for it is going to diminish all the more. The platforms that will permit it will diminish all the more. I saw a note from a woman on Twitter who had watched Fox over the course of yesterday and just couldn't believe how they were like ignoring a lot of the stuff that's going on in this campaign. And I wrote her back this morning. I said, this is not new. This has been going on this entire time. I mean, it's been going on my entire career. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Well, the most fascinating thing about the reality that we understand to be true, if this election breaks in the way that many of us are trying to avoid, is what happens to the church. What lessons does it learn? Mm-hmm. Because just like you said in your lowest moment and what happened to you, that'll be a pretty low moment for the church, because the church, broadly speaking, will have been complicit in bringing it to bear by not being the light in the darkness that it was called to be. What will it do then?
I'm in the same place as well. I talked to a reporter with a national outlet on Sunday, and she asked me, so what are evangelicals' main priorities? And reflexively, I said, well, the life issue, that was in the news on Sunday morning. But I hesitated because I'm having the same difficulty discerning what our priorities actually are. And I wanted to say to her, and I ended up not saying this, but I wanted to say to her, especially in hindsight, I don't know. Because of this, the dynamic that you're talking about, the polls versus the on-the-ground stuff. And I'm kind of having this internal dialogue myself about what are people's actual priorities. And as you said, we're going to find the answer to that question. I had the same thought this morning as I'm just thinking about this dynamic and watching Trump's appearance in Iowa yesterday versus the stark contrast that I can't help but draw in the montage. I'm sorry if you get tired of that. Sorry, I just can't. If I see the contrast there, I'm going to draw that. And I don't have a whole lot of confidence that any lessons are being learned on almost any level. And as Todd has said multiple times, at the end of the day, we're either going to find out that the people have some juice left or the people are the problem. And solace is the truth is its own reward. I'm thinking about this quote that Jason Johnson on the DeSantis campaign that we had on Monday tweeted out. It's a quote from Jesse Kelly's book, Anti-Communist Manifesto. Whether you're 9 or 90, you're never going to see the final victory. You're climbing Mount Everest, but you personally will never make the summit. Learn to love the climb. That's kind of what I think we're going to have to embrace.
Good stuff. I think we'll just leave it there for now. If you guys are okay with that.
Yeah. We got time to, at least.
I mean, something tells me we're going to have
a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. More instances like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does seem, the last couple of years we saw the American left take off all of its camouflage and stop selling and just openly flaunting. It feels like we're kind of seeing Trump do that now.
Yeah.
He's just openly flaunting now. So something tells me we're going to have more moments like this. So we'll come back more in a moment. Don't be limited by restrictive networks when it comes to choosing the healthcare providers and treatments that are right for you. There is another way. Samaritan Ministries connects hundreds of thousands of Christians across the nation who help to pay for one another's medical bills, all without the use of insurance. So consider a medical emergency unfortunately arises for you, and now, though, you don't have to check and see what hospital is in your network or be concerned about the emergency room doctor being in network as well. Nope, you can just go to the hospital you choose. Don't give a second thought as to what's in network and what's not, because with Samaritan Ministries, you're in control of your health care. After receiving that care, send your medical bills to Samaritan Ministries. They'll notify fellow members to pray for you and send money directly to you to help you pay those bills. And when another member has a medical need, you'll do the same for them, because that's what biblical healthcare sharing looks like. Check it out today at SamaritanMinistries.org/Steve Deace. Again, Christians sharing healthcare costs with one another at Samaritan Ministries. SamaritanMinistries.org/Steve Deace. Again, that is SamaritanMinistries.org/Steve Deace. I know we are being told that there's only one place in the world whose the suffering of the people matters. And of course, it's not where you live, but there's only one place here in the world that matters, where the suffering matters. But there's a lot of other suffering happening in the world as well. Sam Brownback is with the Center for Religious Liberty. He's been a senator, a governor, and an ambassador. He joins us here today on The Blaze. Sam, it's good to have you with us, brother. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Steve. Appreciate that very much.
You bet. So tell us about Armenia, and then tell us why our people here at The Blaze need to be concerned about that.
It's an unmitigated disaster that could be prevented by the Biden administration with minimal effort, and it's not happening. And what you've got is an ancient Christian population, first Christian nation in the world, Armenia, and about 300 declared themselves a Christian nation, still that way, surrounded by a Muslim population, this small community called Nagorno-Karabakh, and the Azeris started shelling them yesterday. Historically, the Armenians have been protected by the Russians. The Russians are distracted. The Armenians are moving democratic. The Russians don't like democracy. And so you got this enclave of 120,000 Christians being shelled and slaughtered, strangled to death by Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey. And we're not doing what we could do to help them and to preserve them. And it's going to go even further, I think, into the rest of Armenia if we don't stop them now.
Now, I'm confused, Sam, because the last two presidential elections or administrations have reliably assured me that Erdogan in Turkey is our friend. And so did I get poor information on that?
Erdogan is an Islamist. He wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire. In a new configuration. He's funding it. He's pushing it. He's radicalizing people. He is behind Azerbaijan. I mean, Erdogan is not our friend. He may be a NATO ally, which is questionable and suspect now, but he's not our friend. And particularly if you stand for religious freedom and human rights, he doesn't stand for those things.
What would you want the Biden regime to do? What could they do right now?
Sanction Azerbaijan and sanction Turkey. When we got Andrew Brunson out, who is a pastor that was imprisoned by Turkey, Turks wouldn't listen, do anything. And then President Trump just put sanctions on them on their aluminum steel exports, made Andrew Brunson the most expensive political prisoner in the world, and they let him free. That's what you've got to put some real teeth out there in these things. We've been arming Azerbaijan. We've got to stop doing that. And we've got to stand up for Armenia. We had some exercises with them. I think we need to go stronger in support of them. Anytime a country like Armenia edges closer to democracy, the Russians move away from them and get ornery and start hurting them. And they're allowing the Turks to do this and even airlifting Armenians out of the area, but it's really just depopulating this region called Nagorno-Karabakh so Azerbaijan can take it over.
Have you attempted and have you been successful in speaking with anybody within the administration on this matter?
My former colleagues in the religious freedom area I have, but otherwise I haven't. I've been putting out calls for this. I testified in front of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission about this. I was in Armenia 4 months ago, talking with people. This was all setting up at that time. And then 2 days ago, the Azeris launched the offensive against the Armenians. And it's dominantly it's a Christian population surrounded by Muslims. There have been a Holocaust, a genocide 100 years ago of Armenian Christians. It's starting back up.
What would be the benign, innocent explanation for why the Biden administration would not apply any kind of pressure on behalf of these Armenian Christians, especially because, again, we are reliably assured regularly that the president is a, quote, devout Catholic?
Well, they see Azerbaijan as helping us against Iran, and the Azeris have helped us some against Iran. They would see Azerbaijan as an ally of Israel. Israelis are looking for any Muslim country to help them, and the Azeris have been supportive. And so they would probably look at those two factors, I suppose. Azerbaijan is supplying gas into Europe. And maybe Russian gas just passing through Azerbaijan, I don't know. But those would be maybe the benign reasons why the Biden administration isn't doing more. But if you don't stand up on your basic principles, you're going to get run over. And that's what happens here. We've got to just stand up. And this is also what's happened to all these ancient Christian populations in the Middle East is we just allow them to immigrate to the West, to Europe, to the United States, and then it just depopulates the whole region. And that shouldn't be what these populations are forced to do, to leave. They should be allowed to live in peace and practice their faith peacefully.
Can you make a case that if the argument against helping these people is strategic, I mean, you have more experience in Washington, Sam, than I do, so you know better than I do the moral argument. That's not always the place to go to make such things. So is there a strategic argument for defending this ancient civilization to counter the strategic argument in saying, hey, better for one Armenian Christian enclave to die than for our entire geopolitical structure to perish?
Well, you can look at it several reasons. Number one is you've got a potential ally in the South Caucasus with the United States and Armenia, and that's a good strategic place and region and reason to be there. Number two, if we want to prevent genocide, you're going to have genocides happen to religious minorities. And here's a religious minority. It's already had one 100 years ago. You got a second one. That's a strategic reason. A third one is if you don't want more forced immigration into the United States or the West, let people stay where they are. Don't force them to leave. That's a strategic reason. And then I just think it's strategic to stand up for your values. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, then people are going to trample on those, and you're going to have and continue to have a war of civilizations, clashing civilizations. If you don't stand up for some of these ancient Christian populations, you're going to get more Muslim, other communities warring against them in other parts of the world.
What would you like our audience to do, Sam?
Contact the administration, contact your member of Congress. It would be two things that I think people could do. This is not an impossible task. Some of these tasks, get in, you look at it and go, wow, this is really heavy and hard. Here we have leverage against Azerbaijan and push the administration and the members of Congress to use the leverage we have against Azerbaijan to stop the attack on the Armenian Christians.
Sam Brownback, thank you for joining us, brother. Thank you for raising awareness of this tragedy. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. I want to get you guys' reaction to that here in a moment. First, though, there is a podcast. If you are, after especially hearing stories like that, you're concerned that we continue to abandon the Christian values that once founded and held this country together. And they're going out the window. Check out the Refocus podcast with Jim Daly. He's the president at Focus on the Family. They've been a venerable Christian organization for over 40 years. Jim's been the president there now for almost 20. This podcast is a great resource to listen to. Focus on the Family reaches millions of people to help share God's truth with them. Again, you're looking for the Refocus podcast with Jim Daly, available on Spotify, Apple, anywhere else that you listen to podcasts, whether you're worried about the institution of marriage, your kids being led astray, or more. Again, look for the Refocus podcast with Jim Daly on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. Reaction.
I was initially like, glad we're having Sam on. We can bring attention to this, but man, we've got a lot of issues here at home, and it's hard to split our attention. But hearing this, it really made me upset. Obviously, the tragedy itself, senseless evil that's being carried out upon Christians in Armenia, that's bad. But it really underscored in my mind, 10, 15 years ago, when you talked about America being a leader on the world stage, in my mind, I thought, hey, at our best, we can use our authority, we can use our whatever levers of power and leverage to affect change, to affect, to protect people that are being persecuted like this without nation building. Now when we hear America as a leader on the world stage, it's from people like Mike Pence, mad at the Biden administration for not getting missiles to Ukraine fast enough. We got a lot of problems, and man, it just underscored how slippery this sloped really, really fast.
I thought it was really interesting at the end when you said, hey, it's hard to make moral arguments in D.C., make tactical ones. Well, he said, well, it makes tactical sense to defend your values. Armenia, most people can't find it on a map. You don't know these people. You don't see them. But you defend it principally. You stay consistent in that. He's absolutely right. It's a tactical premise I know you believe, Steve. It's basically in your book, 10 Commandments of Political Warfare. You don't abandon your base. Mm-hmm. But here's the problem. The Democrats' base isn't Christian. The Democrats' values aren't Christian, and quite frankly, neither are most Republicans. That's the that's the problem.
Correct. This stuff happens. See,
you're being ignored because they are defending their values.
That's about what I was about to say. Maybe
the godless
we are
on the
actually.
left is now the godless on the right, and their beards have grown longer overnight. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. These are our values now. This is a post-Christian country. That's what it is. When you have to understand, and I know this isn't fun, you don't do this stuff to yourselves, and especially your children, and then say, man, if we keep doing that, this is a doomed civilization. No. Doomed civilizations do those things. Mm-hmm. Okay? We are acting on our values.
And once again, providentially, Aaron makes the point. I've been having this as a possible guest for a while now, but there's been a lot going on politically. Fitting it in on the day, and I had no idea. I booked this, a week ago. No idea you're going to give your personal testimony. These two have everything to do with each other. Armenia and your testimony could not be more cosmically interconnected.
It's not going to get easier for the truth. It's going to get harder. And it's entirely possible it will never get easier for the truth. There's only one eternal kingdom. Only one. Every other kingdom, therefore, has a page in a history book. Eventually, this kingdom will too. Now, I'd prefer it not happen in my time, particularly with grandkids on the way. But this isn't a Pax Americana. This isn't a 1,000-year kingdom. Those are propaganda points. when previous empires have tried them. And when civilizations are, when they prepare themselves, or like, calves you fatten for slaughter, and the next step is they're on somebody's dinner table, it often looks like this: decadence, debt, death, dumbing down. It often looks like this. And understand, all of the previous empires that it happened to, they didn't see it coming either. They were convinced it wasn't going to happen to them too. Otherwise, they would have turned back if they would have known. It's been a few years since I've used this analogy, but I think it fits. I'll use it again here. There has never been, nor will there ever be, a nation more protected and cherished by God than ancient Israel. And one morning, the northern 10 tribes got up, and it was like any other morning, they thought. We're going to get away with our apostasy. We're going to get away with our idolatry. We're going to, what's my to-do list? We're marrying people off. We're working our crops. No, there's no one here to hold us accountable. There's a few people that will, out in the streets or, off in the hinterlands preaching radicalism, but, they're not mainstream or accepted.
Feeling pretty comfortable there, I say.
They were living pretty comfortably there in Shiloh, and then there's a rumble off in the distance. That a rumble arrives on their doorstep. They're called the Assyrians, and they put bits in their noses, and on the world's first ever chain gang, literally like on a chain gang, and marched them back to Assyria. And that's the people that they didn't kill. And they slaughtered everything else. And those kingdoms were lost to history. Then you'd think the southern tribes, who of course had that example, would have thought, we'll never let that happen to us. Except it did. And one day, a guy named Nebuchadnezzar is outside the city gate. And the check has come due. And it turns out Daddy has been paying attention this entire time. And it wasn't that Daddy stopped watching. Is Daddy was waiting to see if you were ever going to stop doing what you're doing. Because he didn't want to have to do this to you, because Daddy loves you. And once it became clear to Daddy that you weren't going to stop, Daddy said, then I guess I'll have to make you stop. And that was the end of that kingdom as well. More in a moment. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I am Steve Deace. He's Todd Erzin. He's Aaron McIntyre. And you are you. You can let us know what you think about what we think by emailing the show, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. Follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find me as well over on Truth Social at Real Steve Deace there. Don't forget, if you're a podcast listener, if you've yet to do this, we would love, if you wouldn't mind, if you like the show, that is. If you don't, then, don't lie. But if you like the show, please give us a 5-star review, and thank you to the thousands of you who already have. And remember, hit subscribe or follow if you're on iTunes so that each new episode we do shows up in your feed right away. And thanks to all of you that have done that as well. This portion of the show, Theology Thursday, brought to you by our friends over at Constitution Wealth, which has helped our listeners align about $10 million with their value since they came on board here at the beginning of the year. And they think there's a lot more money in this audience that they could also use to put to work on behalf of the spiritual battle happening in America, because they reject the premise that your portfolio and your principles have to be at odds. They don't think that's the case at all. They think you can both profit while being a prophet. All right, so give Constitution Wealth, my friends over there, give them a visit and help them line up your investments with your values at constitutionwealth.com/Steve. Once again, constitutionwealth.com/Steve. One more time, constitutionwealth.com/Steve. Well, I wanted to do a special Theology Thursday this week, if you guys don't mind, because Monday was the 20th anniversary of probably the most important day of my life, or certainly it is up there. You know, here's the thing with any of your testimonies, your conversion is part of events occurred to get you to that point, right? You know, and so my wife was huge in getting me to this point. Meeting her put me on the path that I'm on today. And so, was it the most important day or the culmination of several important days? You know, that I don't know. But it certainly was one of the most important days of my life. September 18th, 2003. Kemper Arena in Kansas City is when my life was changed forever. And we get new listeners to this show all the time. Our show has grown immensely over the last few years, and it's been a few years since I've gone down this road. And one of the questions I get the most consistently in my inbox is about my own testimony and to share it. So I thought, being that this week was the 20th anniversary of that, this would be a good day to do that. And then for the second part of the conversation, I want to discuss two biggest lessons that I have learned through the course of my 20 years. You know what? I'm going to make it three. The three biggest, because three is a good number, particularly if we're talking about a biblical worldview, right? So the three biggest lessons I've learned in my 20 years walking with the Lord. All right, so, I mean, my story is, its beginning is pretty common, unfortunately, in the era in which we live these days. I didn't have the greatest masculine role model growing up. I didn't know my biological father really at all. I had met him a few times as I was a teenager, but there wasn't a real strong relationship there. And it wasn't my fault. I had tried many times to create that, and it just, for various reasons, never worked out. The stepdad who raised me, where I get my last name, was at times a phenomenal father and did a great job teaching me about work ethic and responsibility. And then there are times that he was devastatingly abusive. So I just did not have the strongest masculine role model, like a lot of men from this era. And like a lot of men from this era, I had all the obsessions with the occult, pop culture minutia, porn, all of the accoutrements. If you were a Gen Xer with daddy issues, I checked every box. My terrible temper, I checked every last box, you know. For whatever reasons, a woman named Amy Ramsey decided to marry this mess, and that's her testimony. I'll let her tell it on her time sometime. But a few years into this marriage, we had a child. Anastasia, who you guys have seen, she's a mainstay on our show. And I would have been, you know, I was very familiar with Christianity. I was very involved both in high school and college with conservative issues and causes, and I was college Republicans. So I was around a lot of Christians. I really thought you guys were kind of freaky, and were the reasons we kept losing elections were people like you. You know, one of the reasons why I know what all of the godless right arguments are going to be and how to deconstruct them. I had them all. That's how I know. I would have been like a Romney Giuliani Republican. You know, like that was my religion. The only two books that I ever have sought an autograph from the author in my life were Bo Schembechler's autobiography and Newt Gingrich's book after the '94 contract with America. I mean, I listened to every conservative right-wing talk radio show that I could all day long. As a mailroom clerk, that's what would be pumping in my ears on the Walkman. And I would have been like a lot of right-wing America. I would have thought that because I thought the Ten Commandments were a fairly decent code of morality to govern a society by, provided I didn't have to be held accountable to them, of course. And I thought the Constitution was a cool doc. And the Declaration of Independence, you know, could wake up the echoes. that I was a Christian. I mean, that's what a lot of Americans think. I mean, when we were kids, Todd, the number was 85%. Now the number's like 70% of Americans say they're Christians. That's what they really mean. It's what Abraham Lincoln used to describe as America's civil religion.
That's why so many people seemingly were up in arms when you said some of the founding fathers are in hell.
Yes.
Because they think the same thing. It's like, how could you say that?
Yeah, they wrote the Constitution.
So therefore,
that's how you get into
counted
heaven.
Righteousness.
Yeah, St. Peter standing right there at the pearly gates, and John Hancock's signature is the biggest, so he got the best spot in heaven. And the guys that wrote, that's not how
they're
it
not
works.
trying to take you out of context. They really believe.
No, I mean, they were pinging. I had people I was getting copied on them. People were subtweeting Glenn, demanding that he fire me. By the way, Glenn's not my boss, so I don't know why you guys keep doing that. Okay. Right?
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail this.
No, but
that
is part of it. But they were subtweeting Glenn a few days ago, demanding he fire me for saying that there were founding fathers in hell. Everybody, and I'm like, I just need you guys to know, I'm not just picking on founding fathers. Everybody who doesn't repent to Jesus is in hell. Everybody is. Whether you're a founding father, whether you're a founding cousin. Whether you've never founded a thing in your whole life, if you never repented to Jesus for your sins, you are unforgiven and in hell on the authority of the Word of God. There's only one atonement for your sins that will satisfy God's justifiable wrath against you, and it's Christ. No other atonement will do that. You can offer him no other offering. If you do, you are Cain. You are giving God the offering that you think he is worthy of and you're willing to provide. You're not Abel giving God the offering he demands and is worthy of. And that offering is Christ. That was the offering, the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. But see, you guys would have told me all this stuff, and I would have been like, freak show. No way. No way. But then we have a kid. And really, for the first time, it should not have been this way. It should have been having a wife. Should have been the first time that I really came to grips with thinking of somebody other than myself, but it wasn't, unfortunately. It was having a kid that did it. That's really what it means to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's what humility really means. It doesn't mean to think of yourself less. It means to think of other people more. It means to not be self-centered, to think the world revolves around you. It doesn't mean sackcloth and ash, and I'm just awful and terrible. That's not what it means. I mean, it can mean that if you think you need to be repentant, but it's not what it doesn't mean taking some vow of poverty and isolation. And I'm a walking dunghill. That's not what it means. It means that you are not self-centered, that your life doesn't begin and end with you and what you want. And so it was bringing Anastasia home that really began, as I look back on it now, it really began what I would call the wooing process. God reaching out to me. And I remember going to Amy a few weeks after we had brought Anna home. And we lived in this really crummy 2-bedroom apartment at the time. And I had turned the second bedroom into like my den. I basically had like a bachelor pad in the second bedroom, even though I was married. And so like my porn collection was in there, and all my video games and the hundreds and hundreds of CDs that I had collected all throughout high school and college, because I was trying to be the Jack Black character in High Fidelity. All right, the ultimate music snob. And because that mattered for reasons I don't know, but that's the stuff you think when you're 22 years old and a pagan, and no one's ever taught you what it means to be a man. And so we had to put Anna's crib in there. There was no other place for it to be in the entire house. And I remember I just, a few weeks after we brought her home, and I mean, I'd never loved anything more than this child. In fact, I didn't know I was capable of loving anything as much as I loved this child. And a few weeks after we brought Anastasia home, I just started having like these thoughts of dread that this kid was doomed with me as a dad, and that maybe I'd found the one thing that Hillary Clinton is right about. It's going to take a village to raise this kid. This kid's got no shot, you know. And one day I go to Amy and I said, hey, you're not going to believe this. And we're doing okay. I mean, we're fine. I'm totally good. But I kind of think for our kid, it might be to her benefit if we join a church. And, just so we have some better friends and, infrastructure and stuff around her. And Amy's like, well, I'd been thinking about that for a long time. I just knew better than to bring it up to you. So I wasn't going to say anything. So by this time now, I have a fairly popular sports talk radio show in town. And it's got a pretty sizable audience for a market the size of Des Moines. And because of my background with college Republicans, I kind of knew what the left-wing denominations were. I didn't know what their theologies were. I just knew what their politics were. It's like anything that belonged to the National Council of Churches, anything that belonged to the World Council of Churches, I just kicked all that to the curb. I eliminated them right away. And I went on my show one day and just said to my audience, and you have to understand, I was not doing the kind of show that I am doing now. Not by a long shot. All right? And I just said to the audience, hey, I want some church suggestions in town. And they poured in. And a couple churches got recommended multiple times. And those churches I went and interviewed the pastor and visited the church. And we on a Sunday to see what we thought. And I asked all of them the question that everybody thinks they're the first person to ever think of. And it's funny, now I get these kinds of questions in my inbox, these kinds of questions. And it goes something like this. All right, so if there's no other way to heaven other than Jesus, let's say that out in the Aboriginal outback, where no missionaries have ever landed, an Aborigine dies saving a bus full of school children, does he go to hell because he didn't know Jesus, right? And this one pastor looked at me and he said, I would trust a God who would spare not even his own son on my behalf to deal with these kinds of situations justly. And I thought, that's a pretty good answer, actually. So we started going to his church. Amy took to it right away. I was much more standoffish, much more reserved about it. And we had been there for about a year. She wanted to go and get baptized in November of 2002 and asked me if I'd do it with her. I did, but I really wasn't into it, And we get into early 2003. And one day at church, we advertised for this fall, we're taking a bus full of guys to Promise Keepers in Kansas City, Missouri, on the weekend of September 18th. And same thing with Anna. I just had this overwhelming urge that no matter what else was happening in the world on September 18th, 2003, I had to be at that arena. So right after service, I go out, sign up. Months and months go by. This was like in March or April. Months and months go by. I don't even think about it. And now we're getting close to the event. And now I have this overwhelming feeling like I should be anywhere else on earth other than at that event. And the previous week, I've started I've got a side hustle now. I've started an Iowa State fan website and publication, and on top of my sports talk radio show, that's taking up a ton of my time. And we're in the middle of football season now, and this is when we're going to make most of our money. And I've got a payroll to meet, and can I be away from that during a game week? Michigan had just beaten Notre Dame 38-0 the next week or the previous week. And looked like we were going to have a great team, and we're playing a big game at Oregon that week, and I kind of want to watch it. And I just had this, now I've got this feeling of dread again, but it's about this event. Like, this is a bad thing to do. Do not go to this event. Whatever I do not go, And I'm trying to come up with excuses all week long of how to get out of going on this trip. I'm even offering to fix stuff, guys. I mean, I can change light bulbs. That's about what I can do, okay? I know how to change a tire, a light bulb, the most basic of mechanics stuff. I don't know anything else, but I'm.
You wanted to build a deck that weekend.
I'm like, Aaron, let's build some end tables. Yes. And the only car we owned at this time was a Geo Metro. I don't even think they make those anymore. Is Geo as a car line? They even have those anymore? Like Saturns and stuff, did they just go away? We had this Geo Metro. It was all we could afford. I made $35,000 a year. We were a single income home so that Amy could stay home with Anna. And I was pushing about 4 bills at this period of time. And she basically grabs like a human spatula and scrapes me into that Geo Metro with a bag, takes me to the parking lot where the church bus was meeting for everybody to get on, and just drops me off, throws the bag outside, says, "I'll see you in a couple days," drives away. And I do kind of the universal guy thing for I don't want to talk to you. I put some sunglasses on and I put my earbuds in and I just turned some music on. And I didn't say a word. And I could see a bunch of guys, because now my sports show's grown even more now. And pretty much every guy there knew who I was and probably listened on their way home from work. And I said not a word to any of them. Nothing. Didn't want to be there. Frankly, thought I was better than everybody there. I go and sit in the very back of that bus, that charter bus, and we start to take off to Kansas City. And I'm just pouting now, looking out the window. We get about 45 minutes, an hour or so into the trip, and a guy named Brian, who I'm still friends with today, he pats me on the leg, and I ignored him. Didn't answer. He patted me on the leg again, and I turned my glasses down like this, and I looked at him. I said, "What, man?" He goes, "I know this is going to be weird, but I really think I'm supposed to tell you this." And he starts telling me about his own life and the mistakes he's made and the patterns of sin he's fallen into. And it's pretty similar to my own life. And after about another hour of talking with him and stuff, we kind of, instantly just started bonding, And I could feel the ice around me melting a little bit in advance of this event. But then we get to the event itself. And we're sitting in the upper deck. There's about 12,000 men there. And they start playing music. And guys are like standing up and holding hands and singing along. And I'm like, hell no. Nope. Not doing any of this. So I'm in total buffalo stance, just standing there like, no way. This is some freaky stuff, And the first speaker comes out after the music is done. And so that ice block has reformed now. In fact, it's thicker than it was when I got on the bus. And this first speaker is a guy named Joe White, was his name. And he gets up and he starts telling this story about the 3 men at the cross, the two criminals that flank Jesus. And he somehow ties this into fathers and sons and the damages that fathers do to their sons. And I'm looking around this arena, man, and I'm like, all right, who told this cat I was coming? Because it feels like this entire message is directed at me. And by the end of it now, I'm sobbing at the end of it. And at the end of it, after he's done, he calls for an altar call. And I have this feeling again, like I'm supposed to answer this. Like I'm supposed to go, And I'm contemplating going. And I look over, and one of the pastors at the church that Amy was close with, and he had done some mentoring of Amy, and so he kind of was very aware of me and my issues because he was mentoring Amy. And I see him watching me the whole time. I turn over, and he is looking at me the whole time. Am I going to go down and answer this call? And I looked at him, man, and I'm like, I'm not justifying you. I'm not giving in. And I set my fat ass back down in that chair. And I thought to myself, altar calls are only for really bad Pentecostal television. I'm not going down there. I just to spite him. I wasn't going to let him be right about me. And the Lord said, you're not dealing with him. You're dealing with me. And we're going to deal with this now. And the next thing I remember, when you're nearly 400 pounds, man, it ain't easy walking anywhere. But somehow I got from the upper deck of that arena down to the floor that night. And I answered that altar call. And I'm face down on the concrete floor at Kemper Arena. Just emptying myself is the best way I would describe it. And my life has not been the same since that day. It has not always been perfect. I have not always been perfect. I have done things I'm ashamed of. I've said things I'm ashamed of. I have disappointed the people around me. I'm still very much human. But I am very much not the same human I was on September 17th, 2003. The entire arc of my life changed. Everything changed. What I wanted to do with my career changed. The kind of father I became changed. The kind of husband I was changed. My wife will tell you, she's on her second marriage, and it just so happened it was the guy had the same name both times. My life has not been the same. And sometimes the journey has gone like this. Sometimes it's been perfectly smooth, but the direction has been the same. And the narrow road I was on has been the same. I've not left that road. I've tripped on it many times. I've face planted on it many times. But I got back up and stayed on that road. And I just don't believe I would do that in my own power. And my life is not my own. It was bought at a high price. Someone else gave their life for me to walk that road. And without him doing that, I could not have even gotten on that road at all. I wouldn't even know the road was there, nor would I have wanted it. And finding that road and learning how to walk it was the most important information and truth I've ever learned. And that's my testimony, and that's what happened 20 years ago this week. And over the course of the next few years, people listened to a much different radio show than the one they were listening to prior. Okay. A completely different show. Next segment, I want to talk about the 3 biggest lessons I've learned in that 20-year walk, and I hope it will encourage you, but I'll stop for now. Todd and Aaron, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here in front of you because as part of that story because Steve and I end up meeting in 2004. My oldest, Ainsley, was born at the very end of 2003, and I'm thinking about my future in the same way now that I've got kids, and I reach out to Steve there, and this has happened to Steve just months before this, and he decides to say, we talked about this within the last year, and he just said, I would have probably said no beforehand, but I felt like this was part of I'm supposed to reach out and help people. And so he did, and here we are. It's truly amazing. One part, and Steve told me the altar call story very early in our relationship, but if I knew this, I've forgotten it, Steve, but I did not realize in the timing of this that you had been baptized. Mm-hmm. Folks, to me, that makes the story even more powerful because you just made a movie, Steve, and it's a moment that is very powerful because of how it plays out down the road. But when Nefarious asked to enter James, and James says, okay, finally, enter me. And then it seems like nothing happens. And you go on in the movie and it's clear a lot happened. Steve, you weren't that into it, you said?
No, I basically did it to appease my wife.
But you were given eyes to see and ears to hear that day in ways you couldn't possibly understand. And they didn't necessarily play out that day, but boy, howdy, did they play out.
When I listen to testimonies like yours and others, it always sticks out to me how you can see subtly and sometimes overtly, and you heard examples of both, of God's hand at work. And he's often, it seems like in testimonies like these, he's at work the most when in the moment we don't even recognize it or see it happening. Whether it's, having a kid now and the love that you have innately for that child, in that moment, it just seemed like, okay, this is maybe. It just seemed like, wow, I didn't know I could love something this much. You're opening yourself up to, hey, there is love here that I'm completely unaware of. That was God at work on your heart. At least that's what I believe. Mm-hmm. And then it just so happened that Amy was thinking about getting into church. And it was because of those circumstances that you were having the same thoughts as well. That's God at work. And then Amy dragging you to the parking lot. That is God directly at work, even though it seemed like at the time it was maybe an annoyance.
Very, very annoying.
It's always fascinating to me how you look back at it and it's crystal clear. God was working. God's hand was moving. In the moments, though, and that's the lesson when we hear your testimony and hear others' testimony, in the moment, though, we often don't see that. But it's crystal clear when you look back.
Correct. And you can see dots connect. Events that would not have just happened coincidentally. And associations and coincidences that were really divine appointments. You can see those things in hindsight. But you don't see them at the time. And I mean, my wife and I met in a hookup AOL chat room. We had no intention that story was going to end the way that it is currently going. It wasn't even meant to be a story. It was meant to be a weekend. But what we meant for evil, God used for good. So over the course of the last 20 years, I have learned a lot of lessons in my walk. And a very clumsy one it has been. But there are 3 that I think stand out the most, and I think they will encourage, at least I hope they will, and I want to talk about those when we come back. If you have been fighting a losing battle with excessive sweating, we have the answer. It's called Sweat Block. Get their OG. This was the product that kind of launched them as a thing. Their antiperspirant wipes. They absolutely work, and sometimes for several days to help you with excessive sweating. You can also try their stick deodorant. That's pretty incredible as a product. That's the absolute truth. Then there's my favorite, the deodorant lotions, which help you. They're both good on your skin and prevent excessive sweating in areas where you don't want that to show up, obviously. So you can do all of those products or whatever one fits your lifestyle and save 20% off right now when you go to sweatblock.com and use the promo code DACE, my last name. Get 20% off and the promo code DACE. If you struggle with excessive sweating because you get into, high adrenaline situations, a first date, a job interview, public speaking, public singing, that kind of stuff. All right, sweatblock.com, promo code DACE for 20% off. Promo code DACE for 20% off at sweatblock.com. All right, part 2 of Theology Thursday, and kind of a personal one this week. So I just shared my testimony, the 20th anniversary of my own conversion. And the reason why we have segments like Theology Thursday is because of that day. I've learned a lot of lessons, and believe me, I'm still learning them. Some of them I've had to learn more than once in this walk on this narrow road for the last 20 years. But there's 3 in particular that I want to zero in on. And I hope that they will be encouraging to you if you're on the same road as me or you're thinking about getting on this road. Number 1, stay on the road no matter what. Stay on the road no matter what. Because we are an emotion-based society these days, there's this idea that if I go against my emotions, then I'm going against who I am, and I'm hypocritical. So for example, I'm living a life right now that I know God doesn't want me to live. I've been there. I'm acting and behaving in ways that I know God doesn't want me to act and behave. Been there too. And that's why I'm going to stop going to church. Because I'll just be a complete hypocrite when I'm in there. The opposite is actually true. The opposite is true. It is not hypocrisy to stay connected to the Lord while we are either contemplating rebellion or actively in rebellion to Him. That is actually a demonstration of faith. You have it backwards. You're listening to your emotions. Because we come from a culture that if the emotional sentiment, if the emotional connection is not there, then if we act in ways that are contrary to our emotions, then it's not who we really are, what we really think. The opposite is true. I didn't lose 150 pounds because every day I went to the gym, I felt like it. I didn't avoid putting that 150 pounds back on because every day since I've gone to the gym, I felt like it. Most days, I don't feel like being there. But we're called to make disciples. We're called to be disciples. The root word of discipline is disciple. When you act contrary to your emotions on what you know here to be true, that is actually a demonstration of faith. That's actually a demonstration of discipline. God is not surprised you're sinning against Him. You didn't show up at church that Sunday and God was like, whoa, you're here. Didn't see that coming. Especially after what I saw you do yesterday. It doesn't work that way. God sent Jesus to die for your sins, knowing the sins you've already committed against Him. Knowing the sins you're committing against Him now, and knowing the sins you will commit against Him in the future, irregardless of what Jesus did for you. And yes, I need to remember irregardless is not a word. All right? That you have it backwards. The spring and summer that Amy and I went through a very difficult time and were contemplating divorce, I didn't miss a Sunday at church. Every week I went. And this was going on in my private life. Was I a hypocrite? No. I went and acted on faith. I was unhappy with the direction things were going. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop myself from participating in the direction things were going. And so the only thing I knew to do was to act outside of myself and go to church every one of those Sundays anyway, hoping at some point I would hear some word from the Lord and He would stop me from the road that I am on and that we're both on. And you know what? Eventually He did, which will bring me to my second point here in a moment. Do not get off the road. Do not let go of the rope. And especially go and get up and grab hold of that rope and stay on the road when you're not feeling it. Do it especially then. That's faith. I don't feel it. I don't sense it. It doesn't seem right. But I'm going to do what God says to do anyway. He said for me to get up off my now dad bod rear end and go to church. So I'm going to do it, even though I'm not feeling it. And I'm feeling like a failure pretty much right now, actually. It is faith to act outside of your feelings. There is no requirement to align your faith with your faith and feelings. They may not align. Our faith may call us to do things our feelings don't want us to do. But then we ask ourselves, whom is Lord? Us and our feelings, or the Lord? And that brings me to number 2. God is faithful and does provide. And I don't mean that in a Creflo Dollar way. I don't mean that we're all going to die. I get requests every day in this audience from somebody who either is suffering from a health scare or someone they love is, and I share all of those with you and on social media to get the prayer warriors activated. But understand, the death rate remains for the physical body 100%. But even in that case, if there isn't a healing, God did provide. He provided you his son so that you have a path to live forever with him in paradise. God always provides. We just have to make sure we do not limit God to providing in the way that we anticipated or for the specific outcome that we think is required. But God always provides. I learned this immediately. First time I ever did a public speaking engagement as a believer, I got invited to go speak to a men's ministry in an exurb about an hour outside of our home. I go there right after my show. I give my talk. I don't remember anything that I said. But they had asked me if I wanted an honorarium. I said, no, you know what? It's just I'm happy to do it. It's just a little bit out, it's a half hour outside of my way. Do you guys have like a local, like family-owned pizza place? Because a lot of times those are the best pizza places. They said, oh yeah. I said, all right, tell you what, you have an Italian sausage ready for me to go hot because I'm going to miss dinner. I'm coming to talk to you guys instead of going home for dinner. So you guys have that ready for me. So that's my dinner on the way home, and we'll call it even. They said, no problem, So I get done with my talk, and I go to grab my pizza, and the guy that invited me walks up to me, and he pulls out of his pocket a wad of bills. And he says, hey, man, I know you said you didn't want an honorarium, but we just felt bad because you've got a small kid at home, and we took you out, away from dinner, and we just took up a little collection for you, and wanted to say thank you for your time. And I'm like, no, it's okay. He's like, no, really. I said, no, it's okay. Finally, he's like, no, really. And I could tell now I'm starting to insult him by refusing it. So I look down, and it's just like a $10. It's a wad of bills. It's pretty modest, and there's a $10 bill on the outside. So it's not like it was a king's ransom, and so I didn't have to feel bad. And so I took it from him, and I grabbed my pizza. I thanked him very much. And I just drove home. I get home, my wife is pacing in the house, and early in our marriage, I was not generous with Amy when things were financially tight. In fact, I was very harsh. And so I get home, and she's pacing, and I look at her and say, hey, what's wrong? She goes, please don't get mad. And I said, that's always the first thing you want to hear, right? And she said, I screwed up the checkbook. I thought that I had written a check already for the electric bill, and I didn't. And we're overdrawn. And I said, how much? And she said, it's like $140. Now, when you're making $35,000 a year on a single income home with a mortgage, that's a lot of money, man. But I figured this was a test. And I just kind of swallowed, and I said, honey, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I really also just wanted to eat this pizza. So I get home, hang my keys up, empty my pockets, pull out this wad of bills, I put it on the counter. I just start eating this pizza. Amy, of course, goes right for the wad of bills, opens it up, rips off the rubber band, opens it up, and starts counting it. She said, hey, what's this? And I said, no, the guys took up an offering for me. They felt bad that I, was late coming home from work and missed dinner. So, yeah, I didn't even look at it. I don't even know how much is there. She starts counting it. How much money do you think was in that wad of bills? $140. Exactly what we were overdrawn in our checking account. Every job I've ever had in this business, I've not applied for a single one of them. Never. Every single one. Every radio job I ever got, somebody called me. Even national jobs. Somebody that I did not know called me out of the blue and offered me a job. How did I get on the Blaze? Gaston at CRTV called me out of the blue one day and said, hey, we're going to merge the Blaze. Do you want to be on? Okay. That's how I got on, guys. How'd I get a movie deal? A guy named Glenn Beck I'd never met in my life called me out of the blue. Said, hey, I read your book, A Nefarious Plot. Blew my mind. Didn't even know he had my number. I have never successfully applied for a job in broadcasting in my entire career. And every job I have gotten, I never applied for. Never submitted for. Somebody came and offered it to me. God just strategically placed older men in my life all the way through my walk to basically play the role of surrogate father at different times and provide different life lessons and mentoring that I needed at that stage of life. I didn't know who a Tom Pickrell was. God just put him there. That's just one of several examples. God is faithful and does provide. It may not look the way you want it to look. It may not come in the timing you want it to come. And we will not be fully provided for and cared for until we reach the next side, we reach the other side of eternity. It is a fallen world. But if I've learned anything in 20 years, it's stay on the road no matter what or what you're feeling. And it's number two, God is faithful and he does provide. He does. I've had emails from people asking me, hey, what process or how did you and your wife heal your marriage? God just did it, man. It just happened. Literally we were on the brink of walking away and we looked at each other and it was like, God just stepped in and was like, this is dumb. And we looked at each other and we were just like, this is dumb. And everything changed. God provides. Number three, suffering leads to growth and righteousness. And this one, you are probably, if you go to a church in America, you are probably being robbed of this truth. They are probably teaching you how to avoid all forms of suffering. Don't rock the boat. Don't be controversial. Stay in your lane. Don't take any controversial stances. Don't confront any evil. Avoid pain if necessary. The idea that a bunch of people who live in $300,000 to $600,000 homes, and yeah, even upper middle class suburbanites have problems. But in the end, you're coming home to a garage that is worth more than 95% of the homes the rest of the world can afford. And that's your garage. And the idea that on Sunday, you still have to go to a church that makes everything nice and easy and simple for you because everything was the rest of the week, you're being robbed. The second most intimate encounter I've ever had with the Lord, other than my conversion, happened in a makeshift ICU room 2,000 miles away from where I live last April, surrounded by people I don't even know, in the worst health condition I've ever been in my life, near death, 24 plus hours, a consecutive 103, 104 degree fevers, unable to eat, think, talk. Can't even move my arms, the pain in my biceps from the IVs on each side that had been in there for more than 2 days. But it took that kind of suffering for me to be humble enough, quiet enough, and teachable enough for God to grant me with that intimate of his presence. We have been robbed of the joy of suffering for the name. And a chance for God to show us how faithful he is, to show us in those circumstances how he provides, to show us that he can be trusted. And then when the next time that difficulty happens, we stay on the road, even when the emotions tell us to walk away. See, I had some of those. I've been fired from multiple jobs. I've failed a lot. And so when my marriage was failing a few years ago, my faith muscle had built up enough that I knew. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I didn't know that this marriage was going to be saved. But I knew enough to stay on the road and that God provides. I knew enough to do that. And too many American Christians have not been taught those valuable lessons. And so the faith muscle is weak. As Francis Schaeffer said, our God is too small. And we bow to public opinion. We bow to public pressure. We depart from that road. We don't trust that God is faithful. Lean into the difficulty. Lean into the suffering. It is through Christ's suffering that we were given eternal life, that we got to see resurrection. And it is through your suffering that you will see God perform miracles in your life too. It'll not come through comfort. It'll not come from cheeky outreach programs. but confrontation and suffering. And I'm sorry that too much of the current church age has robbed us of that teaching. And so we are unprepared. And unfortunately, we're facing an era where the suffering is going to be tuned up to quite a bit of a level compared to what we have seen in the past. But trust that God is faithful through those circumstances. I hope that this was encouraging to you. Thank you for listening, John 3:17.